I really love telling stories about the human condition, humanity. I love living and working in other cultures and looking at ways that cultures bridge, how cultures live inside other cultures. I love the environment. I'm a gardener and a botanist, and I really, feel very emotional about what's happening to our Earth right now. In the last 5 or 6 years, I think this is just an outgrowth of the fact that I've produced so many female-driven films, and over half the movies I produce are female-directed, and it wasn't ever anything that I thought about. I just naturally was drawn to it because they were stories that I wanted to see, that I wanted to be a part of telling. And about 5 years ago, when the Sundance Institute sort of released a study saying that the needle for gender equality in our business hadn't changed in 15 years, it didn't quite make sense to me because, I hire a lot of women and my world looks pretty good. But then I started to think about the challenges I had faced in pitching and selling female-driven content, and the fact that there were these kind of stereotypes and tropes and things that would be said, which have been a little bit mitigated in the last 5 years because it's been such a buzz and it's been such a focus. But when the conversation started, it was females can't open movies, women can't handle big cast and crew, and thank you, Patty Jenkins, for knocking down about 10 of those doors. But what I really began to realize was that the places where I was working that had female executives, at the time, I made a lot of movies for HBO, where Carrie Putnam was really in charge of greenlighting at the time. Now she's executive director of Sundance. And Fox Searchlight, I made about 5 movies there, and Nancy Utley and Claudia Lewis and Zola Mashariki. I mean, these were executives who were very much interested in the movies that they wanted to see. So it wasn't that the audience for these films wasn't there. It was just that the stories weren't being told. And so I work a lot in the Producers Guild, and I went back, and we've had a diversity committee. Diversity's been a big part of our agenda for a long time. But I asked all of my colleagues, and we're a national committee, we have 8,000 producers. And I said, do you think we can do more? And everybody hands down said yes. So we formed the Women's Impact Network, and then the first thing that we did was to create something called the Ms. Factor Toolkit, because I felt like from all of my experience of being on the phone calls with the agents, being on the phone calls with the studio executives, being in the room when the directors were being talked about, knowing who got on the list and who didn't and why, I felt like this whole thing that was happening, like there was a big disconnect between the decision makers and the changing landscape of the culture, and this whole behemoth of Hollywood just hadn't kept up with the way audiences have been changing. I mean, not to mention the economic power of women. There's been a seismic shift. I mean, women make 85% of all consumer decisions in the US, and there's a big shift of control of consumer wealth that we're moving in the next decade to where women will control 2/3 of consumer wealth. And this is just objective data, and you can Google it and find it anywhere, but it kind of doesn't get talked about a lot. But I think that we put together this toolkit, which you can find online, where we really tried to go through every platform of the movie business, whether it's documentaries or television or web series, animation, and really try to sort of think about what arguments might get fed back to you when you were pitching a project, and try to prepare the pitcher with the data to debunk the myths, debunk the stereotypes. And so I felt like we had really had a lot of success. Although yesterday I was at we had a Produce By conference in New York, and it was a great day. The first panel that started out was called "Content is King," I think that should have tipped me off right away. But it was an interesting panel. It was a good panel. But I have to say, I just about spilled my coffee. At the beginning, they went down the line to hear just what everybody, what does everybody do? So on this particular stage was History Channel, TLC, Nat Geo, Discovery, and both Nat Geo and Discovery said that their audience is really male, 25 to 54, and I was kind of stunned when the first guy said it, and then the second guy said it, and it was a little bit shocking to me. I got to be honest with you. I mean, I know that I know that we know like how it all works in the system, but I like to think that things are changing a little bit. And the Nat Geo guy even went so far as to say, we try not to alienate women. But the reality is what they're making content for. I mean, Nat Geo, they are expressively making content for science, exploration, adventure. And for Discovery, they're talking about creativity and innovation. In what world do women not fit into that audience? I want to tell you a little story. I made a movie, Mira Nair and I made a movie called The Queen of Katwe. I don't know how many people saw it. But if you didn't see it, the movie is a true story based on a young African girl who grew up in the worst slum in Kampala, Uganda, sold corn on the street, didn't go to school, didn't speak English. Her mom was a single mom, really trying to raise these 4 kids. And she stumbled into a missionary chess club one day, and long story short, she turned out to be a prodigy. And David Oyelowo plays the coach, Lupita Nyong'o plays her mother, and we sort of see, we see the struggle that this young girl goes to kind of rise up to be in this place that she never even dreamed that she could be in, let alone understand. And when we were, Mira and I had made a movie in Uganda like 25 years ago called Mississippi Masala. And ever since then, we've had a film school in Kampala, and Mira spends most of her time in Kampala. And so we were really kind of excited to come back and make this movie and really involve all the kids and people from our film school. And so the studio's Disney, and they really wanted, I think the studios in general, I'll just say, are at a place right now where they're looking for relevancy in the international marketplace. So there's 2 ways to do it: to make international films or to finance local film production, which both is happening, and more success is happening for the studios than financing the local film production, because that they could just finance and it goes, it's plug and play. I think making films in another, we're kind of dealing with all the square peg in the round hole culture clash issues. But they did let Mira make the film that she wanted to make. I was really aware that when we were making the film that Disney kind of saw it as I call it a winning movie. It's like it's chess, it's a sport. ESPN was one of the, was involved as an executive producer as well. But I think the thing that I was really interested in, and I think Mira was really interested in, when I read her biography, Fiona ultimately becomes like the Ugandan chess champion at 14. She goes on to the World Chess Olympiad. The World Chess Olympiad, she loses. And Disney was always trying to sort of figure out how do we have a movie where she loses, but it's a true story. And but the thing that I always loved, about when I read the book was this line where after she sort of, gets over her loss and has processed it all, and she really comes to this very sort of poised place where she says, it's not about winning or losing. It's about the honor of being at the table. It's about the honor of playing the game. I thought it was such a beautiful thing. Like it felt female to me, and it was the reason I felt like we had to make this movie. And so anyway, we're making the movie. I'm really aware that we're writing a winning movie on this page, and we had to go through certain hoops to get the green light. Right, first we had to find the girl. So for 8 months, we had casting directors on the ground in Uganda and Kenya and South Africa, UK, a little bit in Toronto, but Mira really wanted to have that authenticity of the East African characters, and so she didn't want to go too far flung. And we ended up casting Medina Nawanga in the Chibuli slum, which is right next to Katwe slum. So most of the kids that are in the film did actually come from the slums. So we found the girl. Disney was like, "Wow, how'd you do that?" You know. And then we said, "Yeah." And they were like, "Well, who's going to play the mother?" And I said, "Well, we're going to send it to Lupita." And they were like, "Oh yeah, right, yeah." And we sent it to Lupita, and she called back that day. She was like, "I'm in." There's so many actresses at her age who would be really, I've been through it my whole career, afraid to play a mother because you're already getting aged up, right? And you get to a certain age and then you're done. And that age is, about here where men can generally keep going. But that wasn't an issue for Lupita. She was all in. And then they said, well, that's really great. You got, yeah, that's great. And then they said, well, what about the coach? What do you think about Denzel? Or no, I think it's kind of important that the coach is African. And David Oyelowo was having a pretty. Selma had just come out, and he was coming onto everybody's radar. And we sent it to David. It wasn't 24 hours with David. We had a couple of script meetings. We worked on the script with him over a period of 2 weeks, and then he said yes. And so Disney, Disney was in, and we made the movie. And when we got to Uganda, Mira and I realized that we needed to bring a female writer in to really work on the young girl's character and Lupita's character, because the guy that who we love and we had worked with on The Reluctant Fundamentalist really just didn't understand what the world looked like through a girl's eyes. And that didn't surprise me because we hit up on that a lot. So we brought in a female writer, and she wrote the female characters. Anyway, so now I'm going to leap to director cut screening. And so we fly out to Disney and have the screening, tears, everybody really liked it. We go into Sean Bailey's office, and he says lots of positive things, and then he says, now, listen, this is what we got to do. We really got to hone in now on the A storyline, right? You got to trim the B away and hone in on that A storyline. And I'm like, whoa. Well, what's the A storyline? And he said, well, it's the coach. It's the coach, the mentor, and the mentee. And I know. I wish you were with me. So, and then and Mira doesn't like to make trouble, right? When things are going well. So I said, well, wait a minute. We didn't actually make that movie, And he goes, I don't know what you mean. I said, well, that's an important part of the movie, but the movie that we made was really about a girl. And it was a story of a girl who's torn between this gift and whether she can save herself or save her family. And it's becoming, in the movie, it becomes a choice almost, that she has to choose between her family or her gift. And he was like, oh, I see, that's interesting. And the movie was director's cuts are always long, right? So he said, okay, well, I think we screened it like 2:15 or 2:20. He goes, okay, why don't you go back and just get it under 2 hours and then we'll talk again. And I felt like that was a good outcome for that meeting. I sent him all my stuff from the Ms. Factor Toolkit. And we were working our way up to preview, right? We were going to do a big preview in Pasadena. And these previews, they're expensive, right? You hire these companies like Screen Engine, They can cost anywhere from $35,000, $50,000, depending on the size of the audience and the kind of data that you're looking to run. So essentially, I mean, mostly studios like to go into it at the for marketing. Sean called me like 2 weeks before the Pasadena preview, and he goes, Lydia, I don't know. I think maybe we don't want to like go out there and not know what's going to happen. So why don't we just throw a screening together on the lot? Well, there's like 100 people. Pull them off the street. You and Mira come out. We'll screen the movie, get the feedback, and then we'll know where we stand. And so we did. I said, sure, yeah, why not? I love. Jenny will tell you I love the focus movies. So so we came out, and they had literally, like, I don't know where these people came from. They just literally pulled them off street corners. You want to go see a free movie. But it was great for us because it was our first version audience, and we could hear the laughter, we could hear the the rhythm of the emotion in the room. And I sat next to Sean, during the screening, and when it was over, everybody got their forms and they're all filling it out and everybody's rustling, and Kevin Getz, who was running the group, came up, had to lean over me, and he was whispering, and I'm like, and I think it was one of the highlights of my career, actually, because he said to Sean, who pretty much thought I was going to fail, he said to Sean, it's through the roof. And I said, what'd you say? And then we went on to preview in Pasadena 2 weeks later, and the scores were even higher. Like they couldn't be higher. It was kind of ridiculous. But the thing that what the data told us, and this is part of the point of the long story. The thing that the data told us is that there were members of the audience, primarily men, who were very anchored to that David Oyelowo character. And the women were all in for Lupita, the mother-daughter story. And the kids were in for the girl, the cross-gender, they were in for the girl. So the movie was really playing to four quads. You know four quads, right? You got the male, female, older, younger. And that's a rare thing in this day and age, but I think that it's something that's important to think about. And when Mira and I later we've had the conversation, like, well, what if we didn't push back? What if we had said, okay, you put up all those billions of dollars, you're right, we'll do whatever you say, I mean, we would have never known, right? Like, we would have never known how the movie would have played. It would have had to succeed on those terms. So then I think about my day yesterday with Mr. Nat Geo and Mr. Discovery, and I'm thinking, like, how do you know? How do you know that women aren't in your audience? Like, why is that being dismissed? I mean, my friends like science. My girlfriends like creativity and innovation and adventure. So it's reminded me that it's something that we're still dealing with. Yeah. And I think that I teach this class at NYU, and it's we talk a lot about audience, and I think a lot of what I see a lot in, well, not really anybody making movies, but I remember being in film school, and we weren't really encouraged to think about audience. We were kind of making our film, thinking how great it was, and like we're going to put it out there and see what happens. And in today's crowded marketplace, that's a really tough thing to do, because there's so, you're battling for a way to distinguish yourselves in the marketplace. So thinking about audience is really important. I wanted to okay, I'll stay here. I just wanted to share something with you. It's a story that I think sometimes I find it's just interesting, and there's people here that know me, so you may have heard it. But I live in New York, and there's a story that happened one night. On the Upper West Side, there was a father and a son, and they were in a very, very serious car accident. the father was killed. The boy was badly hurt. The ambulance came. They rushed him to the emergency room. They take him right into the operating room. And the surgeon looks down at the boy and says, "I can't operate on him. He's my son." So when I tell this story, it's sort of interesting to see what the reactions are, because more times than not, people are really, really scratching their heads. Okay, how does this work? Okay, he's adopted, so the surgeon is his dad, but the guy that was killed was the adopted dad. Let's see. One person, the last time I told the story, even said, I think the kid was kidnapped, and the guy that was killed in the car was the kidnapper, right? And the dad didn't even know it till he showed up in the operating room. Okay, well, I think by the time you've thought about it now, you all realize that the surgeon was his mother, right? So, and the first time I told this story in my class at NYU, one of the students stood up, she goes, "I can't believe I fell for that. My mother is a doctor." And I told it to my assistant, before I tried it out on the class, and her sister is a doctor in Michigan. And so she tried it out on her sister that night, and the sister said, "Emily, do you know every day I walk into a patient room and they think I'm a nurse?" Yeah. So I'm kind of bringing this around to, okay, this is a little bit, I'm coming into the science realm now. One of the things that I'm thinking about a lot is unconscious bias, and that unconscious bias is where your brain, the shortcuts that your brain takes because we're processing so much data all at once. You say lawyer, I think man, you say, it's just shortcut, right? But the reality is that our world is changing, but the stereotypes aren't changing. And people telling stories tend to jump to the stereotypes rather than think intentionally about how the world is being depicted on screen, how the world is being populated, what does it look like? I mean, little pieces of information, like a third of the population in America are millennial. 40% of the millennial population is diverse. I mean, the fact that we're moving toward a people of color majority in, depending on whose data you're reading, it's happening pretty soon in the next decade or two. This might be why we're experiencing so much fear and anxiety in the power structure that's maybe losing the toehold. This might be why Oscars So White happened. Didn't surprise me. But there is a culture shift happening. And I think that for filmmakers and storytellers who really want to be, take on the proactive side, and I'm kind of using it with my, I guess, I sometimes I'm around a fruit that's not so low hanging, right? So I think the idea of being on the right side of history, the idea of you don't want to be that guy, and it's, particularly in the last 3 weeks where we've hit one of the most astonishing flashpoints in our culture. And I don't think it's because of what happened with that one person. It's because of what happened when everyone who had been silenced for so long all of a sudden had a voice. And that awkward feeling of complicity, of why were we so quiet for so long? How did we not know? Why was everybody so ashamed to talk about it? Why, I think that these kinds of questions, I think as artists, as filmmakers, are things that we're in the forefront of putting on images for people to see. But I did do a panel for Common Sense Media this past year, and they had just issued a study. It was a Gender Watch report. And what was interesting about that study was that they were saying that the ages that stereotypes really start to get embedded, or like age 7 to 14. I mean, it happens from the beginning and past and all of that, but that 7 to 14 age group was really critical. And the stereotypes were bad. They're bad for girls, but they're bad for boys too. The report really showed how, when boys are confronted with what, if you don't mind if I say toxic masculinity, it's bad, because they may not feel like that guy, they may, and then all of a sudden there's an expectation to be somebody that they don't feel like they are. And they, the report showed, higher incidences of alcoholism and drug abuse and violence in their lives, that was really coming from these kind of stereotypes that they didn't connect to. They didn't see themselves on the screen. So I think that, that's a really important thing in terms of thinking about how, with what kind of intention we can tell our stories and really shake it up. And we can do it, because the more diversity we bring into the voices behind the camera, the more the story's going to shift in front of the camera. And my husband's a designer, Mark Friedberg, and he designed a movie called Patterson. And he came home one night and he told me, "Oh, you're going to be so proud of me. We were doing this wall, and it was supposed to be like a wall of the Founding Fathers. And my art director, Erica, came up to me and she said, 'Mark, why does it have to be the Founding Fathers? Why can't there be some others in there?' And Mark was like, 'Yeah, go for it, do it.' And then, I've told that story a couple of times, and then a few weeks ago I was at this art opening, and I saw Erica, and I said, 'Erica, I tell that story all the time. It's like so awesome that you really impacted the way somebody it's background, right? But it means something. You're shaking something up.' And she goes, 'Yeah, but what's interesting is they weren't generic people. They were people that had been significant to the culture of Patterson. And when I went out and looked for those women, I actually found, I found women in astrophysics. I found women who had been in the Olympics. She found all of these women and actually used their pictures on the wall. So the story got even better. And I think that, we have the possibility to really develop a muscle for inclusivity. It's like a muscle that you have to exercise. You can't go to the gym once a month and be in shape, right? You have to sort of exercise all the time. But I think that there are questions that we can ask ourselves about our characters in the story, about whether they have agency, whether they're multidimensional. Are we presenting people with disabilities who are not defined by their disabilities? Are we? I'm working with the Perception Institute in New York on a project right now that's in this world, and I had said, so we'll ask the question, is the female central to the story? And she said, you have to say, is the female of any ethnicity and racial background central to the story? Because when you say female, people think white. So there's all kinds of things that we need to be thinking about and should be thinking about, and there's great books out there to, the ones that I recommend to my colleagues in the Producers Guild that we're putting this culture shift project together. Whistling Vivaldi is a great one. The Hidden Brain is a great one. Blind Spot are the academics that invented the implicit bias test. So I encourage all of you to just kind of take a little dive into it and see how it might affect sort of the stories that you're telling and the world that you're depicting. It can only be good. I know the real reason I'm here is because I happen to produce 2 movies science themed this year. So the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks is based on this New York Times best-selling book by Rebecca Skloot. It's an amazing book. It actually, my son was reading it in high school, and that's how I got turned on to it. But Henrietta Lacks was an African-American woman in 1951 who walked into Johns Hopkins Hospital with cervical cancer. And when they were figuring out how to treat her, they scraped the cells from her cervix. and Dr. George Guy cultured the cells. And I'll say for a long time, scientists had been trying to find cells that would live outside the human body long enough to sustain a research project. And it just never happened. They would die within a couple of days. And so he was always looking for a way to find a cell line that could be sustained long enough to do the research. So her cells, they were cancer cells, and they replicated at a very rapid rate, and they kept replicating, and they weren't dying so quickly. And it became a huge phenomenon. Since 1951, HeLa cells, it's Henrietta Lacks, HeLa cells have been used for almost every major medical discovery, including the vaccine that can prevent the cervical cancer that she died from. But the first one was polio. Jonas Salk used the HeLa cells to really develop the polio vaccine. But once there was that ability to have cells that didn't die, then all kinds of research was happening, and it really kicked off sort of the biotech revolution. And the movie, if you read the book, there's quite a bit of science in the book, and it's really accessible. Rebecca's done an amazing job. It's fascinating. Oprah Winfrey, who plays Henrietta's daughter, teamed up with George Wolfe to direct, and they were very interested in the ethics of the story, which was that Henrietta died that year in 1951, and the family never knew what was going on with the cells and what was happening until about 1975. And so they were, needless to say, it was a very poor African-American family in Baltimore, and there was a lot of anger, and they were upset about it. And so that was coming into the story that way was the story that we told in the movie that we made for HBO. And I think it was I think it's an important story to be told. I think with both Henrietta Lacks and with Radium Girls, they're both historical films that were stories where women were empowered in the course of the story, and the story was buried. It never came to light. And there was a kind of an intersection when we were prepping Radium Girls, and I was in Atlanta. We were shooting Henrietta Lacks, and I remember the day we had the prop show and tell of the radium capsules that we were going to show being sewn into Henrietta's cervix as treatment. And that's, radium. I'm like, wow, radium was, like, they were doing this with radium in 1951. And the reality is that radium, our story in Radium Girls is about the luminous watch dial painters in the late 1920s. So it was women's work because of the small hands to paint the numbers. And they would lip point, to make the numbers really delicate and even. And they were slowly being poisoned by ingesting the radioactive paint. And we have it in our credits that radium wasn't really banned from being used on watch dials until the 1970s. And I realize that there's there's a lot of stuff happening with the EPA right now. And the EPA wasn't really originally formed to regulate chemicals at all. It was only in the 70s, after several really horrific environmental disasters happened, like Love Canal in Niagara Falls, the fish kills in Hudson with industrial toxins going into the river, the general public was really aware that there was a lot of stuff happening that wasn't being regulated. And President Ford signed a bill called the Toxic Substance Control Act in 1976. So I'm thinking that's probably when the radium was finally banned as well. But what's happening now is it's sort of a reversal, is that And by the way, if there's a writer looking for a good story, this story about these two women on opposite sides of the EPA is amazing. The Wendy Hamnet, who's a lawyer from Trenton, New Jersey, but worked in the EPA for 38 years, and then this Dr. Nancy Beck, who's a scientist from Long Island, worked in the Estee Lauder cosmetic labs, and then went to work for American Chemistry Council, representing Dow, DuPont. So Nancy is now running the EPA, and a lot of these regulations are being dropped. So let me stop there for a minute and just see if anybody would take a few questions, and I'm happy to talk about anything. You can ask anything.
I really loved Queen of Katwe and was very shocked that it didn't actually get the sort of traction that I believed it deserved. Is there something that you can comment on with regard to the marketing approach?
Yeah. I mean, it was that's really the sad part of the story, but interesting nonetheless, because I mentioned that the studios, the DVD market crashed, and we all as independent producers were modeling about 25-30% on DVD on our financial models. It turned out for the studios it was about 50. So that coupled with the Great Recession, the studios were really scrambling to how to cover that revenue loss, and so international really was what began to be focused on. But I think that there's still it started in my career because I produced so much internationally. I felt like I was sort of seeing it around me all the time, and even when we went into Uganda with Disney, they were like, everything was full compliance. I mean, we all had to take training on that Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and the studios just wanted everything, compliance. I think there was an internal conversation going on, and I sort of realized it right before we got the green light, and that there was a force in the studio that was saying we should not be making these movies because it takes the same amount of executive energy to make this movie. Our movie was we were like 16.5 million. It takes the same amount of executive energy as it does to make the $200 million movies. So that side of the studio felt like by making movies like this, taking the eye off the ball. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, we're never going to make this movie. And then we got greenlit and we went. And I think it was because we had just sort of put like an undeniable package together, and like, why not at that point? But when we finished the movie, that conversation was really revving its head again. And marketing, who was one of the people who felt that they shouldn't be making the movie, wanted to just release it like a Disney movie. And from all of the movies that I've done, you can platform out and let your audience come to it, and that would, I think, in my opinion, that would have been the way to do Queen of Katwe, and we talked about it a lot, and they were just hell bent on doing it the way they wanted to do it, and so it didn't, they blew it out right around the Olympics time. They spent about $30 million on a lot of television advertising. Probably not the way to do it, but it was, that's what we're dealing with in terms of the studios now, and whether, whether they'll ever come back to making original films. It's just going to be a slow process.
I'm just thinking more about what you were saying about unconscious bias and as storytellers in general, how you can work it like as a muscle, just trying to figure out a way to address the lack of diversity in our own stories or things that we might be working on. I was wondering if you had any specific kind of like exercises?
We're actually working on that right now, this culture shift project that we're working on. And I really like the iterative process of it. So we, actually at the conference yesterday, we put together like a list of questions, that we ask people to take home, run your slate through it, tell us if the questions made you think about something differently, tell us if It changed the dynamics of a conversation with a collaborator, if you had to talk to the director about it, if you have to talk to a studio executive about it, and then tell us what happens. The other piece of this equation is finding strategies to have uncomfortable conversations and to be able to learn how to become an active listener. I think, but I do think that we were already kind of talking about this, and I do think it kind of really dovetails into a lot of what's going to be happening with this sexual harassment thing, blowing the roof off, because it fits into the whole culture shift thing in terms of the only way to get past all of this is to have safe spaces, to be able to talk about things without fear of retaliation. I looked up on there's no sexual harassment statistics in our industry that I'm aware of, but I did look at the EEOC's data, and out of all the people who reported, 75% experienced retaliation. So there's a lot of work to do about how we change culture, but I think, I think these questions, it's funny, the Bechdel test, which I think is like the lowest, possible, I can't even believe that most films fail it. They do. Everybody knows what it is. And I'd had a meeting with Nate Silver from 538 because I was thinking, we had those stats in our toolkit, and it's time to update them. Surely things have changed by now. And then I sat there and I was thinking, I was running my slate through my head, and then there were 2 projects that I had recently taken on that failed the test, and I just went, oh my God! And we had the conversation, and think, well, because you're in the office, and things changed, and we brought in a female writer for the female characters in one of them.
What you kind of thought with some of your talk about with diversity and everything, a lot of it may have to do in the film industry, but also in the whole country, just with people who are going to lose power. And how you tell someone like Harvey Weinstein, hey, you used to have the power where you got to grab anyone's butt you wanted. Or, if there's a movie, like a gangster movie with white gangsters, and when they want to buy a gun, they go to Harlem. And you used to have the power to just be like, well, when we want to do something devious, we go to neighborhoods of color. But now you really have to think through those processes. What is it like for someone to lose that power of doing everything they want? And how do we address that? Because I wouldn't want to lose that power if it was mine,
What I see a lot, and I realized I was doing this in the last few years. When I had a female, we had one project that was a teenage girl film, and I realized I didn't want to go in the room and pitch unless it was a woman or a father, because if it was a father, most of the dads now are pretty progressive, and they have their daughters, and they want their daughters to succeed like their sons, right? It's a little bit of a new day that way. The interesting piece of that, though, is I have to say, because both my husband and I are feminists, but I have a 22-year-old son and a 17-year-old daughter, and my son is he gets a job offer at IBM, and I'm like, great. And he goes, yeah, but I have to negotiate it. And I'm like, what? Just take the money and say thank you. But he went back and he negotiated a salary and a signing bonus and all this. Meanwhile, my daughter, raised by the same parents, is an accomplished equestrian, varsity basketball player, co-editor of the yearbook, and constantly has self-doubt. Whenever I'm in the kitchen talking about the female confidence thing, and she walks in, she'll just do this. It's constant self-doubt. And when you come back into the science and the math and the physics and the, all of that, she is good at math, and she says she's not. It's like telling an anorexic that you're skinny. She just can't hear it, right? And I think that, what's happening, this is an important point, and I'm glad because this is really important. A lot of women are being deflected out of career tracks because most people don't want to pick a path that is going to be harder than it needs to be, right? Most people want to enjoy their life. So I see it all the time. Like anybody in the film business, I can tell you, and any other woman could too, which studios have inviting cultures in which studios have very dominant male cultures. And you can actually just look at the turnover of the female executive, and it speaks for itself. But, I was reading a lot about women in science before I came in, because I was worried that Dora really wanted me to talk about that. And I was reading really some really great stuff about powerful female scientists who are really looking at this question, right? Especially since Lawrence Summers, all of that. They're really kind of like looking at this question. And 100% they blame it on the culture. And I gotta feel like with my kids, I'm blaming it on the culture. Because, I can't stop them from I can't stop her from watching television, what she watches. I can't stop her from the social media. I can't stop her from all that stuff. And she's inundated with it. And there's just a tremendous amount of anxiety that comes from these, expectations, that you kind of don't feel, you're not sure where you fit in.
The fact that you make a lot of movies in different cultures and immerse yourself in them, and you are at a place in your career where you can push back on those notes that you get, say about, I don't want to focus on the coach, the A story of the coach, or it is a story about a young girl. And when it comes to some of my work, when I do try to write stories, because I try to write stories that I would want to see on screen, that would reflect a part of me and my culture. And if I write a story about an Indian American protagonist, a lot of the times I get notes from people being like, oh, but the white person is really our entry into this story, and I don't see enough. And it's like, it's an Indian American. She was born here, she's brought up here. But why is this other person your entry into this story?
This is where I think you have to be prepared for those questions and be prepared with your answer. But I'll give you one right now. I mean, I was talking with Glenn Basner this week, who's one of the great foreign sales agents in New York, Film Nation. I mean, he's my favorite. And we were talking about how difficult it is for him to sell American independent films now internationally, because of the local film productions are filling up the theaters in the local territories, right? So, and I'm aware that now when I'm trying to make international sales, they want me to, they really want to know that we've got a U.S. distributor, because otherwise they don't know how they'll sell an American film without that. So all of that is tricky. The other thing that was interesting that he said to me, he said there are surprises. And one of the ones that he mentioned as a surprise was The Big Sick. Because it's a movie that cost $6 million. It's grossed over $43 million, maybe more by now, domestically. It's over $15 million internationally. And for Glenn, that was a big win, right? Well, in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, of course that movie did well internationally, because, and it did well domestically, because, you're filling in that audience box, right? So I think that I would just think about how you're populating your film, and who, give the audience something that they want to see. They want to see something on film they've never seen before. And that's also why I think the science component is interesting, because there's so much innovative, and there's so many stories that people are dying to hear that they don't know about. But I think in terms of what you're talking about, demographics, there's an answer to that. But I think you have to prepare for it, because people won't, you won't necessarily be talking to the person that gets it, but you bring in the comps to show it.
And it's I think it's enough to kind of do a market breakdown of these are the demographics you can respond to with this kind of story, which I think is kind of what
In my class at NYU, that's what we do. That's what we do with everybody's projects. Is we look at audience. How can we expand it? How can we focus it? How can we target it? How can we make it more inclusive?
Could you talk a bit more about this? You said something interesting, which is international storytelling. And there's a lot of focus on American films coming out with science, but with Queen of Katwe, one of the things that Uganda's noticed was an increase in kids wanting to have more chess clubs. Mm-hmm. And for example, my sister, I'm from Kenya, and my sister started a science camp. We thought we'd be doing one camp a month. It's now 4 camps every 2 weeks. The kids, it's focused on STEM edutainment, but using colors, using interactive. And the kids, and what I noticed also is the girls also become as assertive because the boys would be like, oh, this is mine. They're like, no, you need to go pick one of yours because I'm using this one already. So it's also teaching the girls that. But I think it was last year was the first time that a woman won the award for math. It's not the Nobel Prize, it's the one prize, which I don't remember the name. But there's such a focus in science internationally. Do you see more storytelling heading towards that? Because there's so many accomplished women, both in the U.S., out of the U.S. I mean, we did a fundraiser to do a screening of Hidden Figures in Kenya. We budgeted 1,500 girls said they wanted to attend, so we got the U.S. Embassy involved and got a bigger theater.
Yeah, 100%.
But it's such a bigger platform and such an interest, because growing up, everyone was supposed to be a doctor, a lawyer. If you're going to be an artist, they'd be like, are you going to be an artistic doctor? You know, there's such a strong emphasis, but now I'm seeing a merge in science and entertainment, especially every time I go back home. Just speak on that a little bit, on the influence.
Yeah, no, it's true. And Oxford did a study with Queen of Katwe. They took 1,000 Ugandan kids, and they divided them in half. And they showed half of them Queen of Katwe, and they showed the other half, I don't know, something, one is Miss Peregrine's Home for Children or something. And these are African children, right? Okay, so they sent them off to do some kind of standardized tests. And of course the kids that saw Queen of Katwe performed significantly higher, but not only did they perform higher, they were like performing higher for a couple of weeks in their, you know, and so I think that, you know, if I'm worried about my daughter because she's getting entrenched in culture that is, you know, is not making her feel powerful, media can do the opposite, completely.
I was just wondering, because you were talking about international stories and stories of people of color, and particularly when we're talking about Sloan and science stories, like I think even earlier today we saw that a lot of the prominent, like historical period, especially in Western culture, stories about scientists, they're often populated with white people. And so I'm just curious about like what your process is of looking for that balance of, you know, having a science or interesting topic that people should know more about, but also balancing that with your goals of inclusion.
Authenticity is really important. So we really, you know, we're telling stories that we don't think anybody else is going to tell, or that they wouldn't tell the same way. And authenticity is a big piece of that. We do change stuff around sometimes. I mean, on Queen of Katwe, you know, I don't know if you remember in the chess thing where there's the woman, Mrs. Ghali, who gives the prize to Fiona. Well, in the true story, and it's never like, I was like worried this was going to backfire later with Disney, but it was Mr. Ghali, really, was the head of the Chess Federation. But we have pulled back on some woman characters because just for, you know, we just had to cut a scene, and we were like, oh, we need to rebalance the gender. Well, we'll just make Mr. Ghali Mrs. Ghali. And so we did. And it was actually I don't know how you guys felt, but I thought it was very powerful when she gives that award to Fiona, and she says to a girl who plays with this, you know, unexpected, you know, power of a python. It's a treasure. And somehow her saying that, you kind of have this feeling like she's been waiting years to say this. But we totally changed the true story there. So, you can do lots of different things. I think, you know, Hidden Figures, none of those women weren't together at the same time in real life. And the Kevin Costner figure was made up. And so that bathroom thing where he takes the sign down, that didn't happen. She finally stopped crossing the way. She just kind of did the Rosa Parks thing, and that's how it happened. But they didn't tell it that way, and I think that, like I think to myself sometimes, did they get a bigger audience because they gave a wider audience a character to relate to connect to identify with? Did it, you know, did the movie succeed in a way that it might not have? We just never know. You know, we'll never know. I mean, Barry Jenkins says when he went in to pitch Moonlight, you know, they said, where are the white people?
In the audience.